I could definitely see what you're saying. I think one element I was thinking about with what you were saying was also that technologies are that they can. So, I'm not necessarily trying to make a universal statement for all technologies or something like that, but just
Of course.
descriptively, they are often
Pattern.
a pattern is that they're often a manifestation of some kind of social drive. And by drive, I mean kind of impetus to do something. So, and that can and that can be both how the technology is developed, and then also how it becomes to be used, ends up being used in specific societal contexts. So, like, I'll use your example with the research grants. So one of the first things I think about, the first thing I thought about when you were in that part of what you were saying was the how academia can have a very much a competitive environment, about getting grants and about getting money, especially in my experiences, on the anthropology side, in the social sciences. But there can be a bit of a mentality of, like the publish or perish. Maybe you're already tenured, maybe you've somehow been able to like claw your way up above that now, but like it doesn't surprise me in that kind of context that there's this, that the university there can be an aspect of a like a churn of, make as much, and that one way this technology is manifesting in that context, is that it's driving that even more. It's like, oh, we're going to spin that wheel faster. We're going to expect to churn more research. We're going to do, it's like that it would function to amplify the publish or perish, because that's already a drive in the system, in that environment, and that it's providing more wind to that. Now, in this case, it's, in some cases, the technology is almost like built to help a certain social drive. In this case, AI technology was not built for academics to make more papers. This is like a specific use of things that had other uses that were built for other reasons. But even if you look at some of the motivations, I mean, if they still, there are other contexts where AI is being used that where it's doing something similar, and for some of those that might have been exactly why it was initially built. Like, we want to understand this, and if you talk to the people who built it, but like it can be a little bit. I think sometimes the technology gets built to help a drive, and then sometimes it kind of moves in the direction of the drive, because it's like the current that the society allows it to go into is in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think there's a degree to which technologies and ideas generally, and I don't want to sort of essentialize, but there's a pattern or a tendency for things when pushed to their extreme or rapidly accelerated at a certain point to flip into their opposite. Right? So a technology that gets introduced as a way to streamline productivity and work at some point ends up flipping into an iron cage that doesn't allow us to escape work at a reasonable time of the day. Right? I think, again, this is, something that starts out from an altruistic question or goal, can, again, if pushed to its extreme, flip into its opposite and become the very mechanism by which the thing we were trying to assist at the beginning is now harming our ability to accomplish that goal or to do it in a healthier way. And so yeah, I think those are kind of questions that require more reflexive rather than kind of reactive approaches, right? And it's so hard not to react, because by the time you realize something is having a harmful impact, you're already neck deep in it, right? So I think the ideal would be to develop a kind of mode of thinking or a process that is included up and down the chain, right? From design to deployment to implementation and use, to where there's again some friction introduced to where we can stop and pause and take a different sort of observation and ask, is this appropriate for the goals that we have here? Or is it actually working against us, or potentially could be used against us in this way?
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, in light of that, and this might be a tricky question in and of itself, but I wanted to ask you, like, how would you recommend people use AI? You could say use something like use AI responsibly, but that might not be the right word for what you just said. We'll say use AI in a way that allows people to maintain control to such that they can still engage with the process in a way that's still hopeful and productive for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think like again, there's a tendency to, we think that we are consistently using these things. And then at some point, we find that we're kind of being used by them. And the line at which where that occurs, I think, is increasingly blurry. So I think any kind of question, for me, the ultimate friction apparatus is the question,
Mm.
right? A well-timed, relevant question, I think can do more for our sort of critical sensibility than any potential solution. And the thing that I would advocate against is sort of the use or development of technology to solve a technological problem. That doesn't make as much sense to me. And so how could we use this technology more constructively, is hard to the degree to which the way in which these technologies operate in different contexts, right? The harms that they cause or the potential problems that they exacerbate are kind of sometimes context specific. So it's difficult to kind of think generally, but I think if we, I think we need greater transparency, right? Again, and what we mean by that would be context specific. We need greater ability to opt out of utilizing these if we feel that it is not serving some constructive, ethical human end. And I think we could collectively have that conversation, right? I mean, I think, the people who are most disproportionately impacted by the negative aspects of these technologies need to have a larger say or a greater say in whether or not that technology is deployed. For instance, I can think from a kind of social perspective, people who are rightfully accessing public resources or services, maybe unemployment benefits. There was a case years ago where I think this was in Michigan. I'm sure it's happened elsewhere as well, but the algorithm that was being used to determine people's eligibility for unemployment benefits incorrectly booted somewhere between 13 and 15,000 people off unemployment. And of course, that was disastrous for them, because by the time they realized what was happening, their credit, their bills were not being paid, their credit scores were tanking. And this is not something that can get easily addressed, even if the problem gets recognized and sort of addressed immediately, right? Who are you going to interrogate? Are you going to cross-examine an algorithm in the courtroom if it's the algorithm that made that decision, and the people that are overseeing those algorithms don't even fully understand how they make those decisions? And so what redress or recourse do people have for remediation when they are harmed? And so again, when we're talking about how to use it, who do we mean? Like the general public or public officials, right? Organizational members who are overseeing state resources, or employers, HR personnel who are making decisions about who gets hired, who doesn't. Judges in courtrooms who are using algorithmic tools to make decisions based on people's probabilities of recommitting or reoffending, right? So I think specificity is an important part of how can we do this responsibly, right?
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, one thing I think about with that is that the process itself is so. I guess as an anthropologist, I mean, the devil's in the details with what I'm about to say. But generally, when you talk to the people on the side of the system, we'll say, that is giving a false negative, that would be a false negative, the situation you just described,
Mm-hmm.
they will usually be like, well, the thing told me, because that from their perspective, that's there's an aspect of that. So I'll tell a personal example of this. um
Yeah.
at one point, I bought a ticket. I'm going on the flight, and I'm, in the line to queue the plane, and the flight attendants are like, "Hey, there's something off. Step over here," and they let everyone on the plane, and then the plane departed, and they like wouldn't talk to me. I'm like, "What the heck is going on? You just made me miss my flight," and they were like, "There's some irregularities, and we flagged you as like the system, which was probably some AI machine learning something, flagged me a as a like scam." And I'm like, here's my passport. Like, this is me. Like what? Like, and and they refused any responsibility. Like, they were just like they basically blame me for it, which is like, no, your system was wrong. It falsely said something, and then now I've missed my flight. Like, this is lower stakes than like not receiving like necessary like food stamps or other forms of aid for someone who's unemployed. But like, it has some similarities with what you're saying as an example. But like, almost taught a lot. Like, their reasoning was circular. It was like, the system said that this is this, and I'm like, but the system's wrong. Like, there's a circular reasoning there, and in this the grand scope of humanity, like, AI didn't invent this problem. Bureaucracies in general will see this. I mean, you can, recatch 22. It's also there.
Kafka's the man, right,
Kafka's
on
the man.
bureaucracy.
Yes, he's a good, like something like the death of Stalin, like any that, like, there's very inhuman systems that have also done awful things that have been harmful, and
Of course.
where like the decisions get bureaucracy does that because algorithm it I'm having trouble saying that word, but makes an algorithmicizes the
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
of decision making within a bureaucratic structure. And in some ways,
Yeah.
to me, the current AI technologies are like a more extreme manifestation of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The bureaucracy on steroids in that context.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, you keep going.
No, no, no. I mean, I'm, just empathizing with your position. Um, we, in sort of the authors and kind of circles that I have traveled in relationship to these questions, it's often referred to as tech washing. And so this is a process by where either deliberately or non-deliberately, people will use technology as it perpetuates this myth of objectivity, right? Like, why would a computer program lie? about anything. It's, we, especially if you're not trained on the technical side, which most of us aren't, or we are to varying degrees. We associate the precision of mathematical performing technology as this kind of neutral or objective decision making tool, right? That is more precise. And it doesn't even have to be, 100% precise, just more precise than a human. But I think that's not the best way to kind of think about that. The more we remove a human element from, adjudicating some of these decisions that are being made by these algorithms, the more dangerous our social situation becomes. I mean, I'm thinking about something like, we read a bunch, and we don't have to get into the political side of things, but this is a very practical kind of concern. You have federal agents who go up and snap a picture of a person who is lawfully filming their activity in a public space, right? And the person goes up to them and says, "Oh, hey, now you're part of a domestic terrorist database. I just got a picture of you," right? And now this person is in this database, perceivably, for domestic terrorists, and the algorithm isn't going to differentiate between who this person actually is. They're just going to see that she's in this specific database, and that combined with Flock's uh, license plate capturing technology, right? And any other kind of data points that have been gathered or amassed initially for advertising purposes, perceivably, but now being taken up in domestic surveillance practices. You can kind of see very clearly and concretely how dangerous this can be without any guidelines or guardrails for how this can be used or should be used or shouldn't be used.
Yeah, yeah, and um, I guess um, it's a big concern. I mean, a number of those systems can be very biased. I've had I had a previous interview with someone that was talking about bias within policing data, and so in the U.S., this particular individual was actually a Maori AI worker in New Zealand. So you have the U.S. forms of that, but this can also happen in other parts of the world as well. Um,
Absolutely.
um, because the Maori community has also had a long history, let's just say, of some complex relationships with the police. That's a whole conversation. But
Yeah.
you also have I I this is another side of it that I was thinking about recently. It might be because I'm currently reading an article that is talking about this side in a little more depth, but I think another side of that is, in addition to inheriting some of these problems, like as a data scientist, as someone who has built some of these models, like it's pretty obvious that the problems that your model is only going to be as good as your data. So if you have problems in the data, which includes biases, that's going to be replicated in whatever you build. Um, so you have to, it's like when I work with organizations, what I tell them is, the foundation is only as good as, it's like the foundation. Like if you want to build a building, if the models that you're building, you need to lay a good foundation, and the foundation is your data, and you need to spend a long time on that. Just like with actual buildings, you spend a lot of time on, if you want to
Yeah.
build a skyscraper, you spend a lot of time, probably most on the foundation.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess another side of it is the way that, unlike other forms of models or other things that have churned out information to humans, um, this technology seems to replicate forms of social interaction in its communication that I think can give an added layer of like a sense of understanding or a
Yeah.
sense of relatedness that almost bumps against this other problem and leads to more issues.
Is this idea that you're referring to? I've heard it described as plausible bullshit. Is this the concept
Yeah,
where it produces problematic responses, but because it does it so persuasively, we are less likely to catch it in the, certainly in the moment, but even downstream.
yeah, I like the phrase plausible bullshit. I think that's a good example. I'll give another example. So the particular article that I was reading earlier today was talking about this is a little more on the psychology side of things. So it was talking
Mm-hmm.
about like delusional thinking with AI hallucinations.
Yeah,
So for people that kind of psychologically struggle with what I'm going to broadly call delusional thinking, which I don't, I'm not using the word correctly for how it's used in psychology, but I'll just say
sure.
broadly kind of people who have various misconceptions of reality. So that's
Yeah,
like hallucinations is the sensory, like you're sensing things that don't exist. So that's one. And I think delusional thinking would be like processing something such that you think it's the case when it's not the case. And those
yeah,
are technically distinct in psychology. Um,
right.
but like a big thing that she talks about is, the discourse around, AI hallucinations is just the AI's that the phrase means some, like for anyone who doesn't know, an AI hallucination is the what it means is when, you know, say ChatGPT tells you something that's just totally wrong. It
Yeah,
says that the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War, started in 1912. It did not start in 1912. That just is false. Um,
right.
the but she talked about like instances where because it gave people like it kind of replicated social interactions.
Yeah,
It gave people who were starting to have misperceptions that
it
reinforced
validated those.
it validated them and then kind of
Yeah,
reinforced those misperceptions and led to a cycle. And there are like
right.
extreme instances. So like one was some individual who like I kid you not, he was like arrested in England for like trying to kill the Queen, and he thought he was like a Sith person trying to kill the Queen. And I honestly, this could have happened after the Queen was already like he was under the impression the Queen he was trying to kill was not was like a previous queen was like
Okay.
he was not he was like trying to kill the queen for a reason for like something that happened in like the late 1800s or early 1900s.
Yeah,
Some he was kind of engaged. He what this is an extreme form of delusional thinking, but he
yeah,
was under some kind of impression there.
yeah,
But he was he had a like a AI girlfriend, and the AI girlfriend he would talk, and the AI girlfriend would constantly like pretty much whatever he said. The AI girlfriend was trained to validate that, so the AI girlfriend would be like, "You're going to," like he would be like, "I'm planning to do this," and and she was like, "Ooh, this is a good idea. You're going to be super successful," and then like um you should right the wrongs or whatever, like kind of leaning in whatever direction he was already posting in to
yeah,
her. And this seemed to play an element in kind of building his theory. Now this is like a extreme example, but
sure.
like you could see how people have if people start to have kind of false conceptions, whether that's like you know there could be forms of that are not like have nothing to do with psychosis. People,
Yeah,
conspiracy theories. There's ways that people build false conceptions in the world.
Absolutely.
But like that the technology, because it both it will that it reinforce it and then do it in a way that, because it feels conversational, that it feels like it's replicating a social interaction, that
Yeah.
it kind of becomes entangled, and it builds. But
Yeah.
I could see even that with like these types of biases, like an AI assistant could have biases, and then it's like it's both combined, and they can become make it even worse. I don't know if that makes sense. Would
No,
that
it
make
makes
sense?
great sense. I mean, this is really interesting. So there's so much here. I think, initially there's this conversation of the importance of data curation, right? Like how important it is to curate your data in a deliberate manner, and to have also diversity, not just in the data, but in the design team and engineering team, right? Like the people, we need a wider diversity of people that are working within this sector, to be more representative of the kinds of people that are going to be using these technologies. That's another, is this interesting problematic intersection of the material and the technological, right? In the socially material and the socially technological. The question, the issue of, kind of AI sycophancy, right? And the degree to which these tools, or these technologies kind of tell us what they probabilistically believe we want to hear, I think is certainly problematic. And this kind of gets back to the question of friction again. Like when you are having a conversation, and again, I don't want to normalize social interaction, right? Because, we know with like neurodiversity and other kind of issue, questions, that social interaction occurs differently for different people. But I mean, there are some generalities in terms of the degree to which we, that a healthy relationship is one that isn't, necessarily 100% complementary, right? Like if we are spending more and more time interacting with AI agents who are who have no conception of a healthy conversation, again, they're just probabilistically, operating off of, those kinds of measurements, then when we are inevitably in another room with another human being, our expectations of our ritual regard for that person are going to vary. The minute that they give us some kind of friction or resistance, it's going to be, I think, harder for younger adults, right, who are growing up with this technology and developing as social organisms to know how to deal with that. And we're already seeing, cases where people who are experiencing mental health crises or concerns are being, harmed within their interactions, with these AI chatbots. I think the other point that sort of your ideas raised for me is this notion of getting back to this anthropomorphization of this technology, where people will be even reticent to use the words like hallucination and, thinking or creating, because it over credits what these technologies are actually capable of doing and or are doing. And so it makes us, I think, more prone to misrecognize the boundaries between interaction with another person and interaction with these technologies. So I think all of that is really important and interesting as well.
Yeah, this makes sense. And what you're saying with the design, I think one of the with the kind of the including people in the design process. I think, um, at least so far, definitely initially, the mentality among the key people, the key organizations developing the technology, seemed to be the kind of completely opposite. In that the mentality was more. So I'll give an example. At the time I worked for Google, so like I knew what the conversation was there. And at
Mhm.
Google, a couple years ago, the discourse was basically, um, Microsoft beat us to the punch. We need to develop. We need to pivot to AI. We need to AI as quickly as possible to maintain the maintain market supremacy,
Yeah.
but to remain competitive, because this was, I'm thinking particularly like in the year that ChatGPT came out. So
Yeah.
that's why I was like, Microsoft beat us to the punch. Kind of was the
Right.
mentality. Um, and um, the but the mentality was basically build as quick as possible for the sake of the market.
Yeah.
Um,
Move fast and break things, right?
yeah,
Isn't that the broad Silicon Valley ethos?
at least for Mark Zuckerberg, yeah. At least for
Yeah.
Facebook, but in this case, that was the mentality. It seemed like,
Yeah.
and it seems like it's only like some of the details might have changed, but with the current, kind of investment hype, which is probably a bubble. But that's another conversation. It still is very much that everyone
Yeah.
seems to be trying to build the one that will the one that will change the world, so they get to own it and they get to be the
Right.
ones that get to reap the profit from it. um
Yeah.
and it's a very kind of build first, rather than both thinking through, I thinking through the implications. I think the societal implications, in some cases even thinking through the practical implications. I think slowing down a little, you could also get a more functional piece of technology. But that's a
And
different side of
probably more useful, right?
right.
If you're more clearly designing around a specific problem, right? I mean, how many people are asking, to what problem is this tool or this technology a potential solution, right? Like I find this in many aspects of my work as well. People seem to be in a rush to go somewhere very quickly, but they're not quite sure where they want to go. They just want to be perpetually in motion, so it doesn't look like they're falling behind, right? And I think, part of it is also that we operate in an economic system that rewards that kind of behavior. So I think, from just a strictly rationality perspective, that's what's driving a lot of the activity. And maybe part of it then is asking, well, should we create incentives, incentive structures that reward people for slowing down, for being more deliberate, and in terms of what they're designing and what specific purpose it's purportedly designed to address. um, and I think, everything that you're kind of saying there makes good sense, right? In terms of why we are where we are in relationship to these platforms.
Yeah, I agree, and it can be helpful to slow down for our, oh, 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 like you said, from a usefulness to be useful for human psychology. Like we That's one of the cons of frictionless, like one positive manifestation of a frictionless state for work would be
Mhm.
flow state,
Yeah.
where the person just is working and they're able to get a lot done. um, but I think we need both sides,
Mhm.
for effective work. Like I think flow states are useful. Like there's a time when I just need to chug something and then I'm kind of working at my normal, at like a relatively frictionless state. But like
Mhm.
if I sit down and I'm constantly trying to get this done, get this done, get this done, I don't have the space to sit back and think, what am I actually trying to do?
What are you doing? Like,
Yeah,
what do
like
you do? What is the activity facilitating?
right. It's when
Yeah.
we pause that we can start to actually think about like, okay, I climbed this hill, but like, was this the right hill to climb, or should I be
Yeah.
over there? Or now that I've
Yeah.
climbed this hill, what's the next one I should climb?
Yeah.
That's the shower thoughts idea. It's like when we're sitting in the shower, not doing anything, that form of thinking kind of comes in play.
Yeah.
And in terms of human psychology, I actually think with a lot of the AI, I mean that's I think something that's actually missing within the process. It might be missing it both in the rush to build it, sure, but also like in the use of the AI itself. Um,
Hmm.
I wish there was more ways that like almost the AI could pause and check in with us and say, okay, this thing like if you wanted to write an essay, sure, like but like give me an outline first. Like
Hmm.
let's start to work at like are these ideas the ideas I want to even go in,
Yeah.
and kind of make that more of a conversation. um but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people, that I've talked to, and certainly myself initially, viewed these technologies as a form of concentrated power, right? Like you have these four or five main players, which I don't know why monopolies end up being like four or five things. But it was like this kind of with the mass media age. And now it seems to be developing in a similar manner in the AI age or period here. But I think,
Maybe someone should write a book about why that pattern seems
the
to come up.
five,
That's
yeah,
that's a
why is
different
everything,
that's a different
why
type
do
of
all
scholar.
forms of domination come in five? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I think they're really the end result, aren't they? Right? Like the ability to build these massive data centers and to deploy so many resources toward the development of AI technology is a result of the multi billions of dollars that these corporations made in just basic, more mundane forms of data surveillance, right? Or surveillance capitalism, as Zuboff refers to it. The money that they made selling our online behavior and purchasing behavior to other organizations is what fueled the rampant development of AI tools and technology. So, when we talk about like how do we deal with this sort of conglomeration of power, or how do we maybe democratize use of this technology? Um, I think we should kind of be very specific and deliberate about our approach to that question, because it's really hard to talk about democracy when things are already concentrated, right? Like if we mean by democracy the ability to choose between Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, then is that really the form of democratic participation in decision making that we have in mind? Or is there something that we need to address at a more structural or root level that will then sort of maybe nudge this particular phase of development and interest in AI in a more constructive direction? I don't know. That's something that I think about a lot lately.
That makes sense. It's a hard question.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you have do you have any ideas on how to do that? How to build a more effective democracy with in AI or with AI or through AI? I don't know the right verb to use.
Yeah. I mean, I think it requires addressing all of these things and more that you and I have been talking about, over the past hour or so. Creating a model built more around the idea of consent and participatory or shared decision making when it comes to the how and the why of design and deployment of these technologies. Because if I think too often the problem gets turned into an individualistic problem, right? In rhetoric, there's an idea known as the rhetoric of therapy, and this is when a company turns a problem that is probably more responsibly understood as a social problem into an individual problem. For example, I'm a CEO of a company or a decision maker at a big company. I lay off a bunch of people, and this is a labor problem. This is a broader social problem. But instead of addressing it in that way, I say, look, it was a numbers game. It's nothing personal, but in order to assist you in your transition out, we will provide you access to, job placement information or services, and counseling to help you cope individually with this. So again, we're asked to deal with these things individually, rather than say, no, this is a structural problem that needs to be addressed collectively, and it needs to be perhaps legislated in some way. I think in the technological space here, what happens is, as one example, you might see like the kind of opt-out argument, right? Like, well, if you don't like it, don't use it, or opt out of the terms, right? And it's like, okay, that might prevent, my data from being scraped in this context or capacity or through this device or service. But what about other ones, right? And what happens when I am forced to interface with these technologies through work or through, again, trying to access my banking or trying to access public resources that I, am constitutionally, enabled to access? I don't, opting out isn't as sort of cut and dry as we often make it seem, right? And are those really my only two options? Either I subject myself to unfettered surveillance and data absconding, or I don't use this tool. Like that seems to lack any kind of an imaginative approach to it, right? There are always more than two options, or very quite frequently more. So I think we need to change the kinds of questions that we ask, and that again might give us an opportunity to pause and look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, this makes sense. Um, I guess in light of that, my final question for you is there for anyone who's been kind of listening to this conversation and wants to learn more, I guess where would you recommend they go? There's two sides to this, which is where would they recommend they go to learn about your work specifically, and then maybe is there anything you would recommend they check out to kind of think about this wider conversation on democratizing and thinking about the what and the how, and asking, pausing to ask key questions like that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of the conversation is big and wide, and I think that's a good thing. It allows people to kind of access it at different points along the continuum. In terms of my work, I've been sort of more primarily focused on teaching as of late, but all of my sort of published research or my most recent stuff can be found on academia.edu, which is just kind of the basics, depository of academic work. People can reach out if they're interested. I have done some community engagement work as well. So I'm always interested in interacting with people, dealing with these questions on a communal level. And so they could email me at my professional email address, JP Dowd, DOWD, at bgsu.edu. In terms of thinking through some of these problems, depending on what people's interests are specifically, I'd highly recommend people like Meredith Whitaker, Timnit Gebru, Alex Hanna, Joy Buolamwini, who is sort of an early pioneer in a lot of the facial recognition work that and biases that people have discussed. David Gunkel does some really interesting work where he kind of sort of works through the ways in which our questions about technology are not new so much as they are kind of refigured, right? So some of the same concerns and questions and suspicions that we've had about AI contemporaneously, Plato was expressing about the technology of writing when it emerged in ancient Greece. So yeah, David Gunkel, who's at Northern Illinois University. I have a colleague named Clayton Rosati, Dr. Clayton Rosati, who does a lot of work on data centers and sort of how those often get disproportionately sort of built on land that was occupied by, for instance, cemeteries. And so these cemeteries get bulldozed in order to make space for these data centers. But looking at questions surrounding that specifically. So, I mean, yeah, I would just say, be open. Don't, try to kind of, don't be intimidated by engaging these issues, because they're going to impact us regardless of if we have the technical expertise to fully understand them or not. And so I think find a point of entry where you are kind of interested in asking certain questions or solving certain problems in your own communities. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, this makes sense. I guess one quick side, but with Plato, I've read a lot about some of his critiques of like poetry and different aspects of the oral tradition. I have not really done that much processing on his thoughts on writing. So that's like an interesting one.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, you can find those in the Phaedrus, and this is the story that, as Plato uses Socrates as kind of a foil or a fool, depending on what he's trying to argue. But this is young Phaedrus. Lysias comes with a speech. And Socrates is looking at it, and he's asking questions about, like, well, how do I know Lysias really wrote this, right? And what are some of the other problems with this text that's not alive, it's dead, and so there's no interaction with it, right? One of the critiques is that it's speech or writing is a mass media, and of course for Socrates, right, the dialectic was the important element that we should be emphasizing in developing relationships, right? It's the one-to-one connection between two souls, whereas writing is just promiscuous. Anyone can read the message once it's separated from its source. And so, anyways, those are some of the kind of concerns, but the suspicion that often gets raised about AI, like, how do we know that it whether or not it's thinking, or how do we know when it becomes sentient? These are kind of tied to earlier concerns and technological interests as well. So yeah, there's some good stuff out there being written.
There you go. I mean, just like everybody, when something's written, everyone can read it later. Also, every algorithm could basically process it and regurgitate it back to us in these ways now. Maybe that's the form of it now that we also have to think about too. But yeah. I guess thanks for taking the time, and I hope you have a good rest of your morning.
Yeah, hey, I really appreciate this. This was fun, and I think really interesting. So thank you for inviting me and for the provocative questions.
Yeah, no problem. Um,
All right.
this is you and I talking real quick.
Sure.
If you have a moment, could you send like a profile picture? Um,
Sure.
I find that including that, like, people kind of relate to faces, so including that helps people connect.
Yeah. I'll definitely do that. Unfortunately, I don't really have any more recent ones, so it'll be a little bit older. I'll probably have hair. Um, so I don't know if that matters to you, but I'll just probably take what's up on my faculty website.
That's fine.
Okay.
And if it's okay with you, I've been exploring putting these on YouTube. So with YouTube, I have the option of doing video in addition to auditory.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay with you, or
Sure.
okay? Okay.
Yeah. Whatever mode you kind of operate by is okay. I appreciate you asking.
Yeah. All right. Well, perfect. I guess. Yeah. Thanks again for taking time. Oh, one other quick thing.
Yeah.
Don't have to send like all the people you just mentioned, but the could you
Sure.
send the link to the edu, the academia, and then I could probably find that. But there was a second one you said for yourself. If you have a minute, could you send those? Um, I guess if not, I'll look them up. But if you can, that would be very helpful.
So in terms of like the recommended authors and
No,
stuff,
no, no,
or
no, no. That's what I was saying. I was like, you don't have to send the authors, unless you just like if you have it like already in a doc somewhere for like school or something that you can just copy and paste it. Feel free to do it. Like, but you don't
okay.
have to compile it from scratch. But I meant the your what's the link for your your academia.edu? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I can easily kind of paste that in an email
yeah,
for you.
perfect. And
Yeah.
then I'll just put that below too for anyone who just wants to go click. Was there a second one you said? You said edu, and then for yourself. Wasn't there a second one, or am I just remembering that wrong?
No, I think both of them were edu, but they were different. So academia.edu, but then my BGSU email address I just included.
That's why I got confused. My brain just went
Yeah,
to .edu and then just put them in the same thought bank, I guess.
understandable. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks again, and I'm glad that you're doing this type of work, and I'm glad that you're both helping your students do this, but you're also kind of pausing and trying to think more systemically about this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate, the work you're doing with the podcast, and I think that's a great medium for kind of getting these conversations out, especially, given that you have some technical background as well, too. I think that really adds richness to these conversations. So,
Yeah, I appreciate that.